A quiet morning at Oakwood Park takes a dramatic turn when an entitled woman accuses a homeless black veteran of threatening her safety, prompting a police call. But the events that follow uncover deeper truths about prejudice, redemption, and unexpected human connections. Before we explore this captivating story, share where you're tuning in from in the comments below. If this tale of transformation moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Karen Whitfield strutted through Oakwood Park, her expensive sneakers tapping rhythmically against the gravel path. At 45, Karen exuded an air of privilege, her polished appearance a stark contrast to the natural simplicity surrounding her. What Karen didn't know was that her actions on this seemingly mundane morning would unravel her deeply held beliefs. As she rounded the bend, Karen's gaze locked on her favorite bench by the duck pond. Sprawled across it was a man whose weathered face was obscured by a frayed baseball cap. His clothes were worn, and his presence, to Karen, felt like an intrusion into her idealized world. The fact that he was a black man only intensified her disdain. Karen approached, her lips tightening with displeasure. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice cutting through the morning calm. "You can't sleep here. This is a family park, not a shelter." The man stirred, his eyes blinking against the sunlight as he sat up. "I'm sorry," he murmured, his tone low and respectful. "I'll leave." But Karen wasn't satisfied. "You'd better," she shot back, clutching her designer bag. "People like you don't belong here. You're making this place unsafe." The man's shoulders sagged at her words. He began gathering his meager belongings, but Karen was already dialing 911. Her voice trembled with faint fear as she reported, "There's a suspicious man here, aggressive. I feel threatened." Around them, park visitors took notice. An elderly man feeding the ducks shook his head in quiet disapproval. A young mother jogging with her stroller paused, her brow furrowed in concern. The man on the bench, John Williams, listened to Karen's exaggerated claims with a mix of resignation and weariness. At 58, John had experienced more than his share of life's hardships. A former Marine with over 2 decades of service, he had returned home to a society unprepared to support him. PTSD and misfortune had left him homeless, yet his spirit retained a quiet dignity. The sound of sirens broke the stillness. 2 patrol cars pulled up, and officers Michael Rodriguez and Sarah Thompson stepped out. Rodriguez, a seasoned officer with a discerning eye, approached Karen. "Good morning, ma'am. You called about a suspicious person?" Karen launched into her embellished tale. "Yes, officer. That man was sleeping on the bench and became hostile when I asked him to leave. I don't feel safe." Rodriguez turned to John, who remained seated, his hands visible. "Sir, may I have your name?" "John Williams," he replied calmly. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble. I was just resting and will move along." The officer's gaze softened as recognition dawned. "Mr. Williams, did you serve?" John hesitated briefly before nodding. "Yes, sir. Marine Corps, 23 years. Rodriguez, a veteran himself, extended a hand. "Thank you for your service. Army here. 2 tours in Afghanistan." Karen, watching this exchange with growing frustration, interrupted. "What does that have to do with anything? This man is trespassing and needs to be removed." Rodriguez's demeanor shifted. "Ma'am, Mr. Williams has done nothing illegal. He has every right to be here." Karen's face reddened. "I pay taxes for this park. People like him ruin it for the rest of us." She began recording on her phone, convinced her indignation would garner support. Meanwhile, Rodriguez handed John a business card. "Contact Dave Martinez at the local Veterans Center. Tell him I sent you. He can help with housing resources." He discreetly slipped John some money for bus fare and a meal. Karen's rant escalated, drawing the attention of bystanders who started recording. "You're all the same, protecting criminals while hardworking citizens like me are ignored." Officer Thompson intervened. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. You're creating a scene." Unbeknownst to Karen, the videos capturing her tirade were already being shared online. By evening, social media was ablaze with clips showing her hostility and the officer's measured response. Karen's attempt to frame herself as the victim backfired spectacularly. Her post defending her actions was met with swift backlash. Former friends distanced themselves, and her workplace condemned her behavior. Karen's boss called her in, delivering the final blow. "Your actions don't align with our company's values. We have to let you go." Meanwhile, John's interaction with Officer Rodriguez proved transformative. The connection to the Veterans Center opened doors he hadn't thought possible. For the first time in years, he felt hope. As Karen grappled with the consequences of her prejudice, John began to rebuild his life. Their paths, however, weren't done crossing. The events of that day would lead to unexpected opportunities for reflection, growth, and perhaps even redemption for both of them. Karen walked out of the office in a fog, a cardboard box of her belongings held tightly in her arms. In just 24 hours, her entire life had been upended. Sitting in her car in the parking lot, tears rolled down her cheeks as she was forced to face the repercussions of her actions like never before. Across the city, John's day was taking a completely different trajectory. He had dialed the number Officer Rodriguez had given him, and to his surprise, secured an appointment that very morning. Walking into the Veterans Center, he was warmly greeted by Dave Martinez, the man Officer Rodriguez had mentioned. "John Williams?" Dave extended a hand with a friendly smile. "Mike told me about you. Let's see what we can do to help you get back on your feet." Over the next few hours, John found himself immersed in a flurry of activity. Dave guided him through the overwhelming housing assistance paperwork, connected him with a PTSD support group, and even enrolled him in a job training program. As John left the center later that day, he felt something unfamiliar yet comforting. Hope. The road ahead was still steep, but for the first time in years, he felt like he stood a chance. What John couldn't have foreseen was that his path would soon intersect again with the woman who had disrupted his life just a day earlier. A week after the incident in the park, Karen's life had taken a sharp turn. She had lost her job, many of her friends had distanced themselves, and she felt the weight of judgment from neighbors every time she stepped outside. Sitting at her kitchen table and scrolling through job postings, Karen felt consumed by loneliness and regret. The anger that had fueled her actions had faded, replaced by shame and a deep longing to make things right. With a sigh, she closed her laptop and decided to go for a walk to clear her head. Without realizing it, her steps led her back to Oakwood Park. Standing at the entrance, Karen hesitated, memories of the incident flooding back. Part of her wanted to turn around, but something compelled her to move forward, to face her mistakes head-on. The park was serene in the late afternoon light. As Karen wandered the paths, she noticed the bench where she had first encountered John. To her surprise, he was there again, gazing silently at the pond. Her heart raced, and her first instinct was to leave, but she resisted the urge. Taking a deep breath, she approached. "Excuse me," she said softly, her tone a stark contrast to the harshness of a week ago. "Mr. Williams?" John looked up, his face hardening as he recognized her. Tension was evident in his posture. "I owe you an apology," Karen began, her voice trembling. "What I did was wrong, and I deeply regret my actions." John's eyes studied her silently, his expression unreadable. Karen stood awkwardly, vulnerable, and unsure if he would respond. Finally, he spoke, his voice measured. "Why are you really here? Is it because you're sorry, or because your life fell apart?" Karen flinched at the bluntness of his words but nodded, acknowledging their truth. "Both," she admitted. "My life has unraveled, and it forced me to confront who I've been. I'm ashamed of myself, and I need to change." As the conversation unfolded, John began to sense her sincerity. Although he wasn't ready to forgive, he acknowledged her effort. Over the following weeks, Karen committed herself to volunteering at a local soup kitchen, determined to contribute positively to her community. One afternoon, while clearing tables, she saw a familiar figure walk through the door, John, accompanied by Dave Martinez. Their paths had crossed again, this time under entirely different circumstances. And though their story wasn't finished, both Karen and John were learning that redemption and understanding are journeys built step by step. Whitfield. Owning up to one's mistakes and striving to change takes true bravery. I respect that. Karen felt a sense of relief at his words, as though a heavy burden had been lifted. "Thank you," she replied earnestly. "That means a lot, especially coming from you." As Dave returned with information about volunteering opportunities, Karen had a suggestion. "Mr. Williams, if you'd like, I could show you the ropes here," she offered. "It can seem a bit daunting at first, but it's incredibly rewarding work." John hesitated briefly before nodding. "I'd appreciate that, Mrs. Whitfield. Thank you." And so began an unexpected partnership. Over the following weeks, Karen and John worked side by side at the soup kitchen. Initially, their conversations were stiff and formal, both still keenly aware of their shared past. But gradually they fell into a rhythm, and a tentative camaraderie began to develop. Through their interactions, Karen learned about John's time in the military, the difficulties he faced when returning to civilian life, and the hardships of living without a home. John, in turn, discovered a side of Karen that was humble, diligent, and genuinely intent on making a difference. One evening, as they were tidying up the kitchen, John turned to Karen. "You know," he began, "when I first met you in that park, I never would have imagined us ending up here." Karen chuckled softly. "Me neither, Mr. Williams. And please, call me Karen." John smiled. "Only if you call me John." As they stepped into the cool evening breeze, Karen felt a rare sense of peace. She knew she had a long way to go, that one good act couldn't erase years of prejudice, but she was on the right path. For the first time, she felt genuinely proud of herself. What neither Karen nor John realized was that their burgeoning friendship was about to face its greatest challenge yet. In the months to come, they would both confront their deepest fears and prejudices, testing the strength of their bond. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. They began meeting for coffee outside of the soup kitchen, exchanging stories and advice. Karen had secured a new job, one that paid far less than her previous position, but she was grateful for the fresh start. John, meanwhile, was excelling in his training program and had transitioned into more stable housing. One brisk October morning, Karen arrived at the park for her regular walk. To her surprise, she spotted John sitting on their usual bench, his head in his hands. "John?" she called out, concern lacing her voice. "Is everything okay?" When John looked up, Karen was startled to see tears glistening in his eyes. "Karen," he began, his voice thick with emotion, "I don't know what to do." Karen sat beside him, her plans for a peaceful stroll forgotten. John took a shaky breath. "I got a call last night, from my daughter. My ex-wife's really sick, cancer. It's advanced and she doesn't have much time left," he explained, his voice breaking. "My daughter asked if I could come to California to help and to say goodbye." Karen's heart ached for him. "Oh, John, I'm so sorry. Of course you should go." John shook his head, his frustration evident. "It's not that simple. I can't afford the trip, and even if I could, Karen, I haven't seen my family in years. Not since—" He trailed off, but Karen understood. He hadn't seen them since his life fell apart. Without hesitation, Karen placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "John, you need to be there. We'll figure this out together." Over the next few days, Karen worked tirelessly to assist John. She reached out to her network and managed to secure a discounted plane ticket. She helped him coordinate a temporary leave from his training program, ensuring his spot would be held for him. On the morning of John's flight, Karen drove him to the airport. At the security checkpoint, John turned to her, his gratitude evident in his eyes. "Karen, I can't thank you enough for everything," he said quietly. Karen shook her head, smiling. "You don't have to thank me, John. That's what friends are for." As John disappeared into the bustling security line, Karen felt a wave of mixed emotions. Pride in all they had achieved, concern for John and his family, and a deep sense of loss at the thought of not seeing him for a while. Unbeknownst to Karen, John's trip would trigger a series of events that would push their friendship to its limits. Karen had always prided herself on her good intentions, but her world had been rocked when she crossed paths with John, a man she initially judged based on her prejudices. At first, it was a chance encounter in a park, where Karen, feeling guilty for her biased thoughts, tried to make amends by helping John financially. The guilt from her past actions weighed heavily on her, and she believed she was doing the right thing. For a time, things seemed to improve. John appeared grateful for Karen's help, and the two built a fragile friendship. But when weeks passed with no word from him, doubt began to take root in Karen's heart. She wondered if she had been manipulated, that her desire to right her wrongs had blinded her to the truth. Her mind was a mess of conflicting emotions. A part of her wanted to believe in John, but another part, shaped by years of mistrust, whispered that he was just another person who had taken advantage of her guilt. The situation reached a boiling point when Karen saw a news report on TV. A local station had picked up the story of a con man preying on the guilt of well-meaning citizens, featuring an interview with a woman who claimed to have been scammed by John. Karen's heart sank as she watched the woman recount her story, which was eerily similar to her own. The woman had met John in a park, had felt guilty about judging him, and had helped him financially. But like Karen, she hadn't heard from him in weeks. As the news anchor asked viewers to come forward with any information, Karen felt like the ground was slipping from beneath her. Was everything, the friendship, the growth, the redemption, all a lie? With a heavy heart, Karen picked up the phone and dialed the news station. She knew what she had to do, but just as she was about to hit dial, her phone lit up with an incoming call. The number was unfamiliar, with a California area code. Karen hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Karen?" The voice on the other end was familiar but strained. "It's John. I'm so sorry I haven't been in touch. Things have been complicated." Karen's heart skipped a beat. A wave of relief washed over her, but it was quickly followed by anger and confusion. "John, where have you been? Do you have any idea what's been happening here?" There was a long pause on the other side of the line, and then John's voice came through, heavy with exhaustion and emotion. "Karen, I can explain everything, but I need your help. Can you come to California?" Karen's mind spun. A part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from more heartache. But the other part, the part that had grown over the past months, urged her to listen, to give John the chance to explain himself. "Okay, John," she said finally, her voice firm. "I'll come. But when I get there, you better have one hell of an explanation." As she hung up the phone, Karen knew she was standing at a crossroads. Her decision to go to California could either validate her belief in the power of second chances or shatter it. Either way, the trip would change everything. The flight to California felt interminable. Karen's emotions were all over the place. Doubt, hope, anger, and concern clashed within her as she replayed the conversation with John in her mind. Finally, the plane landed in Los Angeles, and Karen made her way through the busy airport. When she stepped outside, she spotted John standing near the exit, looking exhausted. When their eyes met, there was a moment of silent recognition. He looked worn, like life had taken a toll on him, in a way that Karen hadn't anticipated. "Karen," John said softly, his voice rough with fatigue. "Thank you for coming. I know I have a lot of explaining to do." Karen nodded, her expression guarded. "Yes, you do. Let's go somewhere we can talk." They found a quiet cafe nearby, and as they sat down, Karen couldn't help but notice how much older John looked, as though the past few weeks had aged him years. "So, John," she began, her voice steady, "what's going on? Do you have any idea what people are saying back home?" John's shoulders slumped. "I've heard the rumors," he said. "But Karen, I swear to you, none of it is true. The situation here, it's been more complicated than I could have imagined." Over the next hour, John poured out his story. His ex-wife's condition had worsened far more than he had expected. She had no insurance, and the medical bills were astronomical. His daughter, who was already struggling to cope with her mother's illness, had to deal with the sudden reappearance of a father she barely knew. "I wanted to call you to explain," John said, his eyes pleading for understanding. "But everything was happening so fast, and then my phone was stolen at the hospital. I couldn't remember your number." Karen sat quietly, her anger slowly melting away as she listened. She felt a deep wave of empathy wash over her. "I understand," she said softly, her hand reaching out to touch his. "But why didn't you reach out to someone else? Dave, maybe?" John's eyes filled with tears. "I was ashamed," he admitted. "I felt like I was failing again, like I couldn't handle anything on my own. And then when I heard about the rumors, I didn't think anyone would believe me." Karen felt a twinge of guilt. "I get it," she said. "But you're not alone, not anymore. Now tell me how I can help." Over the next few days, Karen dove into the complexities of the situation. She used her skills to help John navigate his ex-wife's medical bills, organize fundraisers, and even mediate between him and his daughter. Karen found herself in awe of John's resilience. Despite the odds, he remained focused on his family and his ex-wife's care. One evening, while sitting in a hospital waiting room, John turned to Karen. "You know," he said softly, "a few months ago, I never would have imagined that the woman who called the cops on me in the park would end up being my strongest supporter." Karen smiled through her tears. "Life has a funny way of surprising us, doesn't it?" As they sat together, Karen reflected on how far she had come. From a place of judgment and mistrust to one of understanding and genuine care. She had learned to see beyond her prejudices, and John had shown her the true meaning of resilience and forgiveness. A few weeks later, after John's ex-wife passed away, Karen stayed by his side as he continued to rebuild his relationship with his daughter. They worked together to establish a foundation in her memory, aimed at helping homeless veterans reintegrate into society. As their friendship continued to grow, Karen's own journey of personal transformation didn't stop. She became an advocate for social justice, using her experiences to make a difference in the community. John, with Karen's encouragement, began working toward his dream of becoming a counselor for veterans. Years later, they sat together on that same park bench where their story had begun. The park had changed, but the bench remained the same, a symbol of the powerful bond they had formed. "You know, John," Karen said softly, her voice filled with emotion, "I used to think this bench was mine, that I had some claim to it." John smiled. "Now you realize it belongs to everyone." Karen nodded, wiping a tear from her eye. "Just like this park, just like our community, we're all in this together." And so, their journey continued, a testament to the power of forgiveness, second chances, and the incredible bond of true friendship.